Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for July of 2019. I have 12 albums in total to tackle this month. I got a lot of my requests done. I still have some left in the docket, and I caught up on a couple of essential releases that came out this year. With all that out of the way, let's get started. So I didn't talk about Freddie Gibbs when he first collaborated with Madlib on Pinata, but I think that is an incredibly well-executed hip-hop release. One of the best of 2014, for sure. Such a dazzling showcase of Freddie Gibbs' ability to spit, and another great showcase of Madlib's production. Madlib, one of the best producers in hip-hop, for sure. And on Bandana, we see the two of them in a harmonious marriage once again. I don't think it's as good as Pinata, but I do think it is still very tight, very consistent, and a great showcase of both artists' capabilities. One of the biggest hindrances to me, as far as the delivery of this record, are actually some of Madlib's instrumentals. They're not his strongest, and when he disclosed that he made all of it on his iPad, that made a lot more sense. A lot of the instrumentals on here just don't feel as lush or as well put together. Some of the production ideas on them seem a little cheaper, seem a little tackier, but that doesn't hold back a lot of the record. In fact, I think Freddie more than makes up for some of the setbacks that Madlib might have concocted with this record. His verses are still as tight as ever. While he does still have some of those drug-filled bars, a lot of this record is more spent reflecting on his life since he started really coming into prominence in rap. And I think that it is handled gracefully. One of the other big hindrances on this record to me are some of the features, specifically Killer Mike. To have Killer Mike just be on your hook is incredibly just disheartening. Because, I mean, when I saw Palmolive, I got hyped to hear it. Because I love Pusha and I love Killer. And not to say he's bad on the hook, but I feel like he could have really dealt a fantastic verse on that track. That actually is one of the few tracks that also has some of the weaker verses from Freddie as well, because it gets a little problematic. Talks a little bit about anti-vax like Nas did on his last record, and it's disheartening. As a guy who is very progressive myself, and I'm pro-vaccination, it sucks to see somebody who does have a lot of talent just spit about shit that you can't really relate to, that you don't really agree with. You know, I respect that he's allowed to put himself out there, and I, respect his opinion. I just do not agree in any capacity. But, I mean, fucking shit like freestyle shit, even Education, which isn't the strongest track on the record, has Black Thought and Mos Def coming together, and I fucking adore that. And really, it's a dope fucking record, man. It was the first truly, and I mean truly, mind-blowing, consistent hip-hop release that I've heard this year. I mean, I've heard some pretty decent rap records this year, or records that are strictly rap, but this is the most consistent. This has the tightest writing, even if I don't agree with it at all times, and I think it's smart that on tracks like Half Main, Half Cocaine, and Crime Pays, and even Flat Tummy Tea, he spends time reflecting, and he does a little bit of mind expanding, and he grows, and I love that personally. I give this record an 8 out of 10. It's a fantastic release, and one that I find myself keep coming back to as the summer goes on. Now, this is one of those records that I was incredibly excited to check out. This is one of those records that was getting a lot of praise that I wanted to sink my teeth into. And Otoboke Beaver's debut, I mean, they've been around for a long time, but this is their first full-length debut album, Itekoma Hits, is one of the best albums of the year. You guys know I'm a sucker for punk music if it's done really well, and this record is just a blinding set of incredibly impressive punk tracks that feature just 4 really talented women coming together and just writing such good fucking energetic punk songs. I'm not a complete stranger to Japanese punk bands. One of my favorite punk records is by the band Midori. It is Aramamishite, Hajimashite, Midori Desu. Probably said that completely wrong, but they're like a jazz punk band that's really off-kilter and crazy and zany. And while Otoboke Beaver is a little more harnessed than that, I do see the same kind of sporadicness in their delivery. A lot of this record features the girls just changing tempos and speeds on a dime and not breaking stride amidst the madness. There's a lot of tracks where they're either writing really catchy hooks, like on Bakuro Book, or the build-up on 6 Day Working Week is a pain. There's a lot of socially conscious, smart writing on here, and it's a lot of fucking fun. I mean, they talk about some tracks they're pro women, obviously, and I think those tracks land successfully. This is just such a blinding level of talent that clearly feels harnessed. I mean, these women, you can tell they've been at this craft for a long time, and this is the fruits of their labor, and I think that it comes together masterfully. Even if most of the songs from this have been in existence for a long time, they don't feel coupled together on this project, which I think is a testament to how quality the songwriting is, the playing is, and how consistent their songwriting is under this umbrella of very aggressive punk rock. One of my favorite records of the year, bar none. I'm giving this a 10. I know I gave a 10 last month, but I'm just feeling a 10 out of 10 on Itekoma Hits. It is fun. There's a lot of moments that on repeated listens you're going to find yourself screaming along with, and there's so many good moments on here, whether they be the blinding drums, the really just insane guitar work, or just the cacophonous vocals from all four women that are just screaming at you like just a maniacal mad woman. It is amazing. I love this record. It is so fantastic, and if you are sleeping on this band or this album, you're doing yourself a disservice if you love punk music. Another record that was pretty popular on its release, Trust in the Lifeforce of the Deep Mystery by the Comet Coming, British group. One of the members is from Sons of Comet. I loved their record last year, and this is Space Jazz. You guys know I love me some space. You guys probably know I love me some jazz, and this is a harmonious melding of both of those aesthetics. Some of the saxophone work and some of the brass work on here doesn't even sound like their respective instruments. It sounds like guitars. I'm not saying that guitars aren't on this record. There's some more rock-leaning soundscapes, but how weirdly produced this thing sounds and how grand in scope some of these tracks feel, it doesn't sound like your typical, like, regular jazz record. This isn't like Kamasi Washington's The Epic, which also has some grander, almost classic science fiction leaning tendencies sonically. This is a completely different beast, and I'm happy with that. Really, my biggest complaints on this record is that it feels a little imbalanced. Some of the songs I wish kind of went on for even longer. I would have loved to have seen what they could have done with some of the sounds on tracks like Astral Flying, or even the opener, because the end is really the beginning. There's a lot of drone work on there that I would have loved to have seen fleshed out more in an elongated sense. I mean, this is still a great record. It's actually a tighter listening experience than you would gather from, like, Space Jazz. It's only like 45 minutes, but I could listen to this thing all fucking day. Like, I love its synthetic textures. I love that they meld these synthetic textures with these really harsh, played, smooth, very contradictory, I know, but very well-constructed arrangements of their instruments. I think that when they aren't leaning on more drone-centric stuff and it's a little more normal, it's tight, and it comes together fantastically. I do think Blood of the Past, which is one of the more longer tracks on here that actually features vocals, or like spoken vocals, comes together really well and acts as a nice centerpiece to this grand sounding jazz record. I mean, this thing is so fucking awesome. Again, biggest complaint is I wish it were longer, and I wish it would have explored some of its more sonic ideas more, and because of that, I'm giving this an 8. I think it's really good. I think it's really fucking nice. If you like space and you like jazz, you'll like this record. It's got some classic feeling production that has a little bit of an experimental twist. Really cool, really fun, such a good record. And I'm glad that I checked it out because you guys know I love me some Sons of Kemet. You guys know I love me some jazz, and this was a nice thing to invest my time into. British electronic duo 2814 dropped their newest record, Lost Fragments. Now I got into these guys back in 2015 with Atarashi Hi no Tanju, because it was like a vaporwave, you know, odyssey. This is a great record. I love that record, and I hadn't checked anything of theirs since then, but I figured I'd check out Lost Fragments, and I mean, it's fine. It's a little derivative. It unlike Trust in the Lifeforce, The Deep Mystery, I feel like could have used with a little bit of a trimming. Some of these songs that just feature these lo-fi droning synths don't do anything to progress. They just kind of seem very monotonous. It's almost the complete opposite of what I want out of this type of thing, you know, whereas I feel like I could have listened to The Comet is Coming all day. I had a hard time sitting through some of these tracks because, I mean, the third track is like almost 16 minutes, and it feels like a chore because they're not doing anything to flesh out these long, drawn-out ambient passages. A lot of the tracks on here feel very samey, and a lot of the production ideas that they're toying with feel very tropish. I like this kind of sound, I really do, and I like ambient music. You guys probably could guess that, but this thing is just very banal, and it doesn't entice the listener to keep attention to it. I'm sure you could smoke to this or take psychedelics to this and trip and have a good time, but I don't even think that if I were baked off my ass, I'd really want to listen to this. I'd rather listen to something that's a little more engaging with its listeners. Personally, I'm feeling like a 4 on this. It's a record I just didn't vibe with. Like, I like some of the ideas. I like Arcadia. It's a little more energetic. It's got a little more of a tempo to it. But there's a lot of moments I was wanting some more liveliness or some more vibes, as it were, that weren't just laying on a keyboard. And that's not what I got here. I think it's pretty boring. You'd do a lot more. You could find a lot more if you were wanting something of this ilk. I mean, it's kind of upsetting because I do like their one really revered record, and I was hoping they could have kept it going, but I don't think they did with Lost Fragments personally. On the complete opposite side of that, TWRP dropped a new record this year, which I wasn't expecting at all. I thought that they were going to take a little bit of a break from Together Through Time, and they just turned out another record on Return to Wherever. And this is a much different beast than that. While Together Through Time was a culmination of years of EP work with various guests and different ideas, and it came into this big apex where they had a lot of dudes that people were wanting them to work with on there, some great tracks with other people that they worked with in the past. This is more just TWRP being TWRP. While Aaron Hansen is on this record, on Hidden Potential, and there is some ambiguous DJ host throughout a lot of this, this is TWRP being TWRP. It is them shining, and oh my god, this record is so fucking good. If you're wanting a great synth funk summer record, this is the one to throw on. Or if you're wanting a great summer record in general, Return to Wherever is a fantastic place to start. The guitars on like Back in Town and Generous Dimensions have this very Top Gun sheen that melds with their synthetic drums and their fat bass lines fantastically. Their vocoder vocals on Generous Dimensions, Hidden Potential, and even All Night Forever are amazing. All Night Forever is such a great kind of slow jam closer to ride the night out to. This record just feels like a party that went on from like midday, late midday to sunset. It's a great way to end the day out, even though it's only 35 minutes long. They do a fantastic job of melding those sleek, vocoded, infused vocal tracks with some immaculate instrumental work, like on Solar Winds and Typhoon Turnpike, which is my favorite track on the record. It is so fun and boisterous. The bass lines throughout this record are killer. Really, I just want more. I want so much more. Again, like Together Through Time was everything I wanted it to be. If you were to give me a record that's really just TWRP, this is all I could ever want it to be. I mean, it is so fucking fun. It is such a fun, funky record. These guys are so fucking talented. You guys know I love these fucking dudes. And this is just, it meets all of my expectations wonderfully. I just want more. I fucking want more, guys. God, I could have used with more tracks like Under the Sun and Cosmic Tides. Again, such a perfect summer record. Such a fun, funky fucking record. I love the synth work. I love this band. You guys know that. This, getting like a strong 9. I had it at an 8 for the longest time, but I keep coming back to it. It's so short. I want so much more. But this, so good. So fucking fun. Probably gonna end up on my of the year list, as did Together Through Time. Listen to this record. If there's one record that you take away from this, even though I love Otoboke Beaver so much, listen to TWRP. I've been a bigger fan of TWRP for longer. Listen to this fucking record. It's so fucking good.
Believe in me, grieve for me if I'm gone.
I can't say the same for KRIT Is Here. You guys know I love Big KRIT. I talked about him on the diss tracks list that came out last month. I love Big KRIT. I'm a big co-signer of him. I was excited for this record because it was a sequel to KRIT Was Here. And on KRIT Is Here, he instead shits the bed, which isn't completely out of his wheelhouse. One of the things KRIT is kind of notorious for that he didn't do on Forever Is a Mighty Long Time is shit the bed on his studio records. And on this one, he just makes some really generic trap. While I like the instrumentals on a lot of it, I think he starts it off strong with KRIT Here. I think it's a really powerful, strong opening, and I think it's great that he doesn't wait too long to get into Addiction, which is a nice, tight lead single. This thing is too long. It overstays its welcome like halfway through it, and I think that a lot of the features don't really culminate to much. And while I like some of the instrumental work on like KRIT Here, and even on Prove It, Mississippi, it could do with some trimming, and it could do with some non-trap shit. Like, KRIT's flow is just so neutered by wanting to stay on these very generic sounding beats with some really lazy hooks like on Energy and Obvious. Like, I'm so bored with this record, and it's upsetting because, I mean, I really love Big KRIT. One of the best rappers to pop this decade, and for some reason, instead of dazzling us by finishing out the decade with a record that he should have done, he did this, and it sucks that I don't like it as much as I was hoping to. This thing is very average. I'd recommend any of his mixtapes, or even Forever Is a Mighty Long Time, well before I'd recommend this. It's not terrible. It's just disappointing because it's coming from one of the best voices to come out of the South this decade. I'm giving this a 5. It's very average, and it's upsetting because I think even his production, his other strongest suit, like Big KRIT is one of the best producers to really make a lot of shit this decade, and because he's wanting to lean on this trendier shit, it just neuters his production too. By wanting to make something a little more commercial friendly, he neuters a lot of his sound, and it's upsetting to me. I was kind of surprised that Saul Williams was dropping a record this year. I didn't expect that. I didn't know that was happening. And until like the week before it came out, I dropped my Let Me Tell You About, and he was like, hey, I'm dropping a record. And I was like, what? And he was like, Ganja Sufi's producing it. What? And on Encrypted and Vulnerable, we have a much more challenging release than Martyr, Loser, King. And I think it's to its detriment. I like a lot of this record a lot, and I like that he's continuing almost the narrative follow through from Martin Luther King, like on Before the War and I Own the Night, Sufi Vision. He's not doing a lot to harness his writing in a way that is the same like on Martin Luther King or even his debut. You know, I almost equate this to a different version of Stardust because it has a lot of one type of production with Saul's very poetic delivery, which I like on Stardust, and I like this for the same reason, but whereas records like Martin Luther King and Amethyst, and even his his self-titled record, have some tracks that have more of an earworm approach to songwriting, whether it be like on La 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 or List of Demands or Burundi, I still respect the ambition and the experimentation seen here. I like a lot of the weird textures in the instrumentals. I like a lot of his really erratic delivery, and I like that he's still challenging himself to write records like this. You know, I think that there's some tracks that try it, like Full of Shit. I just don't think that tracks like Full of Shit come to the same caliber as those tracks that I mentioned from those previous records. And I feel like this record's strengths are more in its more abstract approach. Because there are tracks like on Stardust, like the opener, or his cover of Sunday Bloody Sunday, where he's doing some hook-centric stuff. It just doesn't come together as well as the more abstract shit. And this is kind of a case of the same taste. And again, have no problems with that. This is still a fucking solid record and gets a lot of recommendation from me personally. If you like abstract hip-hop with some weird synthetic instrumentals and you've been wondering what the fuck Ganja Sufi's been up to, because I surely was after he announced this, he's been up to some really cool sounding shit. I like the sounds of this thing. Again, I feel like this is a great companion piece to Martin Luther King with some of the digital war lyrics that are on that record. They're kind of here on this record as well, and it kind of, again, continues the mindset from that in a more experimental way. This gets a 7 from me. Really nice record, a great culmination of Saul's talents and Ganja Sufi's talents as a producer. I just feel like there should have been more moments that showcased Saul's diverse aspects within his songwriting and his performances that I don't think were utilized to its fullest here. Comes the Sunday Driver! And a Jack White's side projects and post-White Stripes bands. I dig the Raconteurs. I think they're okay. I think their 2 records are solid. I think they've written some tight grooves and some really catchy rock songs. And I was kind of excited for Help a Stranger. I thought it was going to be a nice kind of step down from Jack White's very experimental record that he dropped last year. And it is, but personally, I think this is a little too far of a step down. I don't think this thing is terrible by any stretch of the imagination. There are some really good songs on here, and I like kind of some of the directions they take their sound on tracks like Shine the Light on Me and Sunday Driver, which Sunday Driver kind of has this Beatles-esque sound to it that I really enjoy, and I would have loved to have seen more injection of on this record to help it stand out from the 2 previous outings. And I adore the drums on Hey Jip. I think the drums on that track are fucking tight. They're tight on a lot of the record, but they really shine on Hey Jip. But a lot of this record is super mediocre. It's super average. Like, I think the title track, the production on the title track and Born and Raised, and some of the more bluesier centric cuts just sound very cut and dry. They sound very bland and very milquetoast, and I didn't like a lot of that. I think that the production is pretty flat on a lot of the release, which is interesting because while there was some instance of that on Jack White's last record, a majority of the production on that record was fucking awesome. I loved the way the guitar sounded on a lot of the cuts, and I loved the way the experimental production or experimental compositional choices were produced on that record. And again, while the production on tracks like Sunday Driver are fantastic, it's super inconsistent. I like the writing on it. I think it's fine. You know, I think the hook on tracks like Don't Bother Me also kind of bring the record down a bit. Don't Bother Me almost seems like an offcut from Jack White's last record that crept its way onto here, and it feels like a redheaded stepchild on a record that already feels a little disjointed, but I got some respect for the desire to branch their sound out into different avenues. I don't think it's anything that is gonna win me over one way or another. Like, I think it's a solid release in its own regard. I just kind of wish it were ratcheted together a little better. Some of the production was beefed up a little more. The drums were punchier more consistently, and the guitars kind of didn't feel so flat and neutered, but it's alright. Personally, I'd probably give it like a 5. It's okay. It's inoffensive, and its shortcomings and its avenues where it does shine are still there. I just wish it were a little more consistent, personally. So this next record was a request, Gary Clark Jr.'s latest record, This Land. It was requested by Random Rock and Rail Roast and Reviews. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really like this thing. I don't think it's the worst thing of the year by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought this record was kind of boring. Gary Clark Jr. is a blues guitarist, and he wants you to know he's a blues guitarist. I don't have any problem with blues rock. I don't even have any problems with interpolating the blues or rootsier sounding music into a modern atmosphere. I mean, I fucking love Algiers, and they're straight up just making gospel and that kind of rootsier sound more contemporary by injecting industrial and interesting sounds into that. And Gary Clark Jr. tries that in some instances on here. I mean, how the opener of this record, This Land, almost reminds me of Algiers with its like hi-hat work in near the end of the song. But the production sets that song and Got to Get Up and a lot of this record back. It's super inconsistent, but the one consistency across it is that the guitars are overproduced. Like, I get letting the blues guitar sit in the forefront on a blues record, but there's a point where it gets excessive. And to me, a lot of these songs kind of drag on for too long because of his wanking solo work. And again, I don't mind virtuosic playing. I like dudes like Satriani and Vi and Buckethead and all those dudes. But those dudes are a different type of guitar player. Blues wank is just boring. Like, it quickly devolves into the same sounds time in and time out whenever you have a blues player just playing to play excessively, you know? And I get it, that's Gary's shtick, I'm assuming, because he's a blues guitar player, but it just doesn't do anything for me.
At least in a contemporary sense, there's not much to this that really feels all that inspired, or the inspired moments are again set back by the production on this.
I like that he's trying to write more progressive songs, like What About Us. I appreciate that a lot. And the writing on a handful of this record is okay, but it's set back by the inconsistent production, the wanking guitar work, and a need to go on for too fucking long. Like, this record does not justify its hour-long runtime to me personally. I think a lot of the middle of the record is boring, or again, like Got to Get Up has some cool ideas with its composition, but it's held back because they want to let that guitar stand too far in the forefront. Even a track like The Governor, I like The Governor. I think it's a well-written song. But again, production makes it sound like a hot mess. Or not the closer, but the track Don't Wait Till Tomorrow, one of the more soulful cuts. I think it's fine, but it sounds so washed out. The elements of the song, none of it pops, and it sounds very bland and banal because of it. Like, I feel like if you trim this thing, you gave it a couple passes in the mixing bay, it would be a solid record. But in its current state, I just don't like it. I think it's a chore to sit through, and a lot of its elements don't do anything for me because of how they're produced. I personally give this a 4. I don't think, again, not worst thing I've heard all year, but it's just a bad record. It's a record that didn't impact me in any meaningful way. The next record I checked out was Anima, the next Thom Yorke solo record, and I was really impressed with this thing. I mean, I'm a guy who loves The Eraser. I think The Eraser is a fucking great record, and I even like Atoms for Peace. I think it's a solid project. I think Thom's non-Radiohead-centric output has been pretty alright. I'm a pretty adamant defender of The Eraser, honestly, but I think Anima might be his most sonically cohesive outing he's ever put out alone. I think that while I enjoy the experimentation in genre shift or in tone shift on Atoms for Peace and on the Eraser to a lesser degree, this has this just overabundance of dread and bleakness in its sounds, and I like that. I like the kind of dreary sounds that you would hear on like a Radiohead or even a Thom Yorke solo record. It just sounds more consistently put together, you know? Even when he's trying to create these more catchier or earwormy elements like the vocal stuttering on Twist or elements of Dawn Chorus, which is a beautiful fucking song. It doesn't detract itself in that kind of way. Those elements don't detract from the overall tone that the record is setting forth. I feel like Thom even got some influence from Radiohead's work on A Moon-Shaped Pool with this record, just in the sense of keeping the sonic thematics consistent and a sonic follow-through on the record. I think he's done a better job at crafting longer songs too, like Twist or the closer Runway Away. Thom Yorke is a big fan of that IDM scene, and it's still a huge element of this record. He does a better job at keeping those dance elements consistently enticing, and the glitch elements are better introduced on here than they were on his previous records. This is just a great fucking record. It's one that I keep coming back to because it has a lot of good ideas in it. I love the lushness in this as well. Like, again, the Eraser has its moments of lushness, but it feels a lot more dry of a mix. Whereas this feels a lot more harnessed. That you can tell, because, I mean, I don't hate Tomorrow's Known Boxes, but I don't listen to it much at all. This, I feel like, is a much stronger outing than that record was, especially following the Eraser. And I like this. I like this a lot, man. I'm giving this an 8. This is a fucking great record. The sounds are really full. Thom fits these cuts so well. And again, it feels like he's not trying to be Radiohead, which he wasn't trying to do on the Eraser, but he's found a way to incorporate Radiohead's own direction into his music better. So I actually was pretty excited for Remo Drive's Natural Everyday Degradation. I like their debut. You know, a lot of people in the scene do. I saw them live last year with Hannah, John, and Crash. And I was excited to see where they'd take their sound after a pretty enjoyable EP last year with pop music. But I'm not digging this as much, man. I know that's kind of the general consensus. A lot of people don't seem to really be digging this record as a whole. They're kind of cherry-picking songs, and I kind of feel the same way. I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's the worst thing I've heard this year, but it is a lot more average. And I think part of that has to do with the production. I've been a real slut for good production this year, but I mean, fuck. This, I said it about one of the records I reviewed early in the year, Fallujah's record, where it sounds like the label they're signed to. This sounds like an Epitaph pop punk release, and I don't like that. I think one of the things that I thought was really charming about Greatest Hits was the production had a nice bite to it. That bite's gone on this record. Again, I like a handful of the tracks on here. I like Separate Beds. I think Separate Beds is a solid track. I like the opener, $2. I think $2 is a nice, fun song. And I even like Halos. I think Halos is solid. And the songwriting on other tracks is also really good. Like, I like Ezra and Maria. I like the writing on that song. But the production is so atonal on here, and it lessens the impact of the vocals. The vocals on here sound worse because the production holds it back. I think the singing style is fine. I don't mind the singing style. I've heard people harp about that. But to me, I think it's because of how the rest of the music sounds around the vocals that it neuters them. It brings them back, to me. Because I listened to this record and I'm like, I feel like I would like this so much more if some of the songs weren't here, they were written better or just not here, or if the production was just a little different. The drums sound so mediocre. The guitars have the same sound as like a bunch of other bands in the genre. And it's upsetting to me, you know, because I think these guys have potential. Like, I loved seeing them live. They create this really nice atmosphere, and they're a fun band to watch. And again, I like their writing, but yeah, I don't like this. I don't like this much at all. I'm giving it a 5. It's an average record because of its shortcomings, and I was hoping for a lot more from these guys. So the last record I checked out this month was a request by Low Water Pump, and I wanted to thank you and Random Rock and Roll Wrestling Reviews for your requests. I never get upset when I get requested records. It's always a good time. The Dead Days, the latest record from Get Scared, a band that I'm not familiar with. I've never heard their stuff before, but they're kind of a pop-punk meets metalcore infusion band, something I've seen a handful of times in the scene, even when I was more into the scene, as it were. The biggest comparison I can think of with this band would be A Day to Remember, personally. Their second record especially, the way the vocals sit, they're not as deep and mid-range as they kind of become. And I think it's fine. I don't hate that sound. It's just not something that I personally gravitate to anymore. I think in some songs, actually, the vocal timbre detracts from the sound of the song. Like Hell Is Where the Heart Is. I think the riffage on that is solid, but the vocals, when they come in, the pop-punk vocals detract. They clash with the guitars and the rest of the band. It's kind of a similar instance I had with Astronoid earlier this year, with how there was some clashing in the way the band sounded. I think when they pull it together and they really get either a pop-punk or a metalcore sound together, it works like on Like It or Not, and some of the elements where that happens. And then the other thing I also don't like is they have some moments where they get a little atmospheric and Imagine Dragons-y, like on Calling All Crows. And I'm just not a fan of that style. I feel like I realize that there's a market for stuff like this, and I get why someone would really love this record. Personally, to me, it just doesn't do anything for me. I think the writing is very juvenile. I get why it fits the genre. Just again, personally to me, it's not a sound that I gravitate to anymore, and it's not something that I'm going to be revisiting. I don't think it's terrible. I think it's really solid. I think it's a solid record. I think that when they pull things together and they pull off the metalcore pop-punk stuff sometimes, the Deceiver is a great example of that, but this record is just not something. It's almost like it takes me back in a time machine to like a time like when I first started the channel. I feel like I would have eaten the fuck up out of this record, but now I don't hate it. I'm not going to give it like a low score, like a super low score. Like I'm feeling like a 6 for this, but I feel like definitely like 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I would have eaten this shit up, and I would have loved it a lot more. And that's been the month. What did you think? Did you like the records I talked about? Did you think I gave some differing opinions? Let me know. And if you have a record you would like for me to check out, let me know in those comments down below. The listening log is also linked down there, so if you want to see what I have requested, what's in the request docket, because I still have a few things, or what I have left to get to on my own personal radar, it's down there. But thank you for watching. Thank you for your support here and on Patreon. Thank you for liking, and thank you for subscribing if you chose to do so. I'm going to get out of here. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.